Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tech Talk with Tech Stop. We've got a special guest on today, so you're not going to want to miss it. We've got a lot of cool stuff to talk about with AI and how it's changing the world. So we'll be right.
Welcome to Tech Stop's Tech Talk with your host, Niles Banghauser.
Alrighty. So yeah, we're going to be talking about AI. There's a lot of stuff in the media today, and we want to kind of clear up some of the confusion. What is AI today? What is it going to be? Where did it come from? So we're going to talk about all that. But first, we'll make some introductions. So we've got special guest John Haass on today. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
So why don't you tell everyone just kind of who you are, where you came from, and
Sure. My name's John Haass, and I've got a couple of hats. Right now, I'm on sabbatical from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, where I founded and teach cyber intelligence and security. We've been doing that for a number of years, and about 3 years ago, founded a not-for-profit Center for the Future Prescott, and we have a new website, centerfuture.org. We're a 501. We're a 501c3. And our concept is to have startup companies that will provide tech jobs here in Prescott so that there are more technology-related opportunities for people, in web, in cyber, in networking, all sorts of great stuff, including AI that we're going to be talking about today. So it's related to the work that I've been doing for decades.
Yeah.
And here it is. AI is finally coming around to being something that people can use.
Yeah, and it kind of seems like it came out of nowhere. Over just the past couple months, we see everything about ChatGPT and and then Google and Microsoft are getting on board, and everyone's talking about it. But I think there's a lot of confusion out there about what it really is.
Yeah. And the fact that it's been around a long time. I mean, it was first proposed, believe it or not, back in the 50s. But at the time, of course, they didn't have the compute power that they have today. And probably everyone's heard of the Turing model for artificial intelligence. And we've been chasing this for decades. What I think really happened is that last fall, ChatGPT came out with a generative AI. And it really has caught the attention of the world because for free, you could interact with it by just typing, which is pretty powerful. And it, of course, everyone probably knows it was the fastest growing web system in the world ever. So pretty exciting.
Yeah. And so one of the things I think about when I hear AI, at least, is Skynet and end of days and all of that stuff. So how does that concept of AI relate to what we actually have today?
Yeah. One of the differences is that people have always talked about weak AI, strong AI, the Turing test, a variety of things that measures how smart AI really is. And today, researchers are saying, well, maybe we're at about a 2-year-old. And you say, well, how in the world is that possible? When I talk to ChatGPT and it comes back to me, it sure seems a lot smarter than a 2-year-old.
It does, yeah.
However, the reason it's so cool is that it generates responses based on the entire database of the internet, which is pretty broad.
Yeah, that's a huge data set that it's able to utilize and give us what we see. So would you say, what's the threat to AI, or what threat is AI introducing, rather?
So all the time, any technology has the ability to be beneficial, and it can be abused. And so the abusing part is what we're concerned about today. I was just at the RSA conference last week, and RSA is the largest conference, been going for over 30 years in the cybersecurity. And we use believe it or not, this thing called RSA every day when we shop, when we go online, when we do HTTPS, although no one types it out anymore, right?
Right.
You don't need to. It's assumed. But the threat is that our adversaries in cyberspace can utilize these technologies to do attacks on us. For instance, there was a joke at the conference. We all know that the Nigerian prince that's got $5 million and wants to deposit in your account is a fake, right?
Yep. Yeah, classic scam.
Classic scam. They even had misspellings. They didn't use English correctly. But wait a minute. What if instead of using their own English, they use ChatGPT to improve the English language? Or suppose you're attacking someone in Spanish, you have perfect Spanish. So if you can't distinguish the fake email from a real email, and you happen to make the mistake of clicking, that's a problem. That's a threat, especially if it happens to you and your bank account.
Yeah. We're often just one click away from some sort of disaster.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
So that's a threat that people can relate to, but you can expand upon that, because what if, for instance, AI is the one that's deciding whether or not you're going to get your auto loan? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing?
Well, you'll definitely have arguments on both sides of that.
Right. It's a threat if I think I'm qualified and I ought to get a car loan, but the AI says, oh, wow, we see everything about you, and we've decided that you're not qualified and you're not going to be able to pay it back, and the risk of us having to come and retake your car is too high. We're going to deny that loan, and no human ever even looked at your application. That's a threat.
Yeah. And with AI, part of, and we're kind of getting there, but part of it is that it's software that writes its own code, kind of builds itself, which can mean it can be difficult to know why AI might make a certain decision.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about ChatGPT and that class of artificial intelligence is that it's not even exactly a program. It's a model. It's a model for learning. It's a model for interacting, and it's a model for accessing data. And that model, sure, has programming underneath it, but the model has become larger than the program that began it, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, so it's not, you don't have a programmer sitting down and writing code like you would a traditional piece of software.
That's right. The thing has launched, and now it is learning, and it is learning how to interact with the whole world. And as questions come to it, as texts come to it, requests, it gathers that into it as part of its ongoing learning. So we might call it adversarial learning. Each person is the adversary, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's learning from us, because we'll say this and we come back and say, that's dumb, Mr. ChatGPT. Try again. And it doesn't take offense. It doesn't take a coffee break. It just comes back with something new.
Yeah, it's incredible. How long do you think it's going to be until we see AI resemble what we see in sci-fi and be more, I don't want to say sentient, but closer to that?
Well, that's been a question that's been asked for years. And at one point in the 90s, a company went and said, let's try the Turing test and see if we can pass. Well, they failed, but they learned a lot more about it. And the weak Turing test, some people would argue ChatGPT resembles today. And the weak Turing says, if I'm sitting in this room and I'm talking to you, can I determine whether it's a machine or a human? And depending on where you go with that, some people would say, well, we might already be at weak AI. Strong AI is much more difficult, right? Because it includes creativity. ChatGPT is not creative, even though you say, oh, well, look what it did. It created this thing, but it really didn't.
It's all based off of some sort of data.
It has a huge data. So you ask it about, tell me about the history of this and write it in the language of a 12th grader so that I can turn it in for my homework.
Mm-hmm.
It'll try and do that. However, you can find that it has errors, and you can find that it's not going to be able to get out of the bounds of that. What if I were to just give it a non sequitur and say, yeah, but how about those dahlias in the backyard? Suddenly, it may fail in
Mm-hmm.
being able to context switch. Humans can context switch.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely still very robotic. It's not completely fooling anyone yet.
No.
But I don't know. Did you see the article about the? I think it was a mother that got the phone call.
Yeah.
That they had AI generated her daughter's voice,
Mhm.
and they claimed that the daughter had been kidnapped and all that, but it was actually just AI.
It was generated.
Yeah.
Well, sure, and that's the thing, is that if you contain something in a box, and the box is a scenario of being kidnapped, and you're at the end of a gun, and somebody is telling you've got to be constrained in what you say, or else.
Mhm.
Well, then even you as a human would try to be pretty careful, but your eyes might give you away, or different things. But if it's just a voice, and we can now do deep fakes,
Yeah.
then how are we going to be able to distinguish reality from a fake? It's going to be increasingly difficult.
Yeah, and it's kind of just the tip of the iceberg. With the technology we have today, people are still coming up with new and terrible ways to use it.
Right.
But what are the limitations?
Oh, there's plenty of limitations. As I mentioned, today, really no AI that we have is as creative, even as a several-year-old child. So when you take a look at the ability to understand the visual world, to be able to interact, if you remember Terminator, I can't remember which one, they pretend to be the mother on the end of the phone. And they say, well, how's the dog? Well, it doesn't know the dog's name because it's already killed it. Right? And so it makes the mistake of naming it incorrectly. So that's, again, a limitation, because an AI doesn't have access to any history that might be personal to us. Just as we're talking to each other right now, I can't know a fraction of what's gone on in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could only interact with you based on what I know and am presented. But you can dig up things from the past. And if I'm really supposed to be your friend from high school, surely you can come up with scenarios that would cause me to trip over it because I wouldn't have enough data.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a limitation.
Yeah. So yeah, it's really just about the data set that we feed AI today.
The data set and its ability to take the data and move from it.
Mm-hmm.
Because data by itself is relatively flat. And so that's why I'm saying you have to containerize it. If you let the universe be too wide open, suddenly there's the possibility of so many interactions that even our large computers today can't deal with what is effectively infinite.
Yeah. And so I've got a Tesla, and I've got the full self-driving, they call it. And it's interesting, you can actually kind of see that in action,
right?
Where it's given a lot of data, it's given a lot of rules, it knows how to read speed limit signs and arrows on the road and all that, but it'll run into a situation that is maybe just a little different than it's used to, and it's like, oh, I don't know what to do now.
Yeah.
Even though it's supposed to be able to
sure
adapt.
And that's why I think they have 5 levels of self-driving
Mm-hmm.
in the automobile industry. Yeah. And we would say there were somewhere between 2 and 3.
Yep.
And because of that, people that think that the car is able to do it actually have either wound up in the hospital or dead.
Unfortunately.
Because it's not quite ready. One of the tricks somebody showed a plastic bag, going across the road, and the car didn't know quite what to think of it, because it didn't know plastic bag being pushed by the wind across the road, and it swerved. Mm-hmm. Now, luckily, there wasn't anything harmful that it swerved into. But you can imagine if there were other cars, it would have to make the decision: do I run over this unknown object,
Right.
or do I potentially cause harm in either of the other lanes? And of course, everyone's heard of the problem. You're going down the road and there's going to be an accident. Who do you protect?
Mhm.
The owner and driver of the Tesla, the most vulnerable person, the woman with the baby carriage, the other car that has this many people in it, which
Right.
the Tesla can't know. So these kinds of ethical conundrums can't be solved by an AI today.
Yeah.
Nor, I should point out, could most people.
That's true. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's the dilemma too, is rightfully so. Many people are scared of AI because it certainly has the potential to do a lot of bad. But at what point are we, would we trust it to help us, create new helpful technologies? At what point do we kind of hand that power over?
We're already doing it. People don't realize that AI is already being used for a variety of things. For instance, customer support. You can get information. Have you ever done the chat? Sometimes the chat is not a real person anymore, but one of these helpers. And so it has limitations in how much it can help. And we've noticed that on phones. Some of the older versions are not very smart. And so they cause you to say, no, I want a human. No, send me to somebody else. And it says, well, before I hand you over to a human, I'd like to ask you just a few more questions.
Yeah.
And it just asks you the same damn questions that it already has asked you. So it shows how stupid and limited it is.
Yeah.
But there are things being used, for instance, as I mentioned, for being able to decide about insurance, about mortgages, about loans, about financial services, about being able to make decisions, for instance, in leasing, operations, because these are repetitive items. There's an AI that is helping to create contracts with lawyers. So you can see that there's a lot of things going on today that we may not be aware of.
Yeah, and it's been happening for a long time.
It's been happening for quite a while, and they've just been getting increasingly complex. But of course, always the problem is it biased?
Yeah.
Humans are biased.
Well, and we talked about that data set. If that data set is biased, and as you said, humans are, so the data is going to be biased some way, right?
Well, it can be.
Typically.
It can be, because how do you gather the data?
Yeah.
The information that is on the internet, for instance, today is widely biased towards English because of the fact that the United States, being the wealthiest and the largest economy of the world, drives so much of the internet. So it's biased towards the United States and English. We don't think of that as a bias because we're in the United States and we speak English.
Yeah, that's just our life. Yeah, that's a good point. So with all of this in mind, so some of the big tech leaders have called for a pause on developing AI. Elon Musk and others have said, let's put everything on pause for 6 months. We need to get some laws and regulations in place around this.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it would help? Do you think it's needed?
Well, everything is interesting. Let's put it that way, because if you pause, do you really have a pause? It's like a ceasefire. In a ceasefire, you can measure whether or not there are bombs going off, whether there are guns being shot. How do you measure whether there's a ceasefire, so to speak, in AI development? Are you going to go around to every lab in the world that's working on this and saying, have you guys abided by the AI ceasefire? And certainly it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do something about it. But I do think it's important for us to start to talk. We've already started, but start to really talk about the ethics, the limitations, the way that we should monitor it, the ways that we should be able to judge an AI? Is it doing what we expect it to do?
Mhm.
What are the biases? If we present it with a variety of classes of problems, can we study then the results? Because when we put out a new drug, the FDA goes and chooses, 30,000, 40,000 people to participate in the drug trial.
Mhm.
They try to get a sample. But what we know is that oftentimes those samples are biased. And yet they're used to do something that's important to us in our own lives. Decide whether a drug should be sold in the United States or not. So consider that same model for an AI. What are the limitations? Should the AI be allowed to do this? Should it be allowed to do that? At least we should have the discussion.
Yeah, certainly. I think it was a TED Talk I listened to about AI several years ago. It was talking about this AI model that was created in order to simply identify a wolf versus a dog. You would take a picture and determine which it was.
Yep.
And so they created this, and then they were testing it, and it kept identifying certain dogs as wolves. And they're like, they didn't understand, why is it doing that? That's clearly a dog. Well, they did some debugging and troubleshooting on it, and they found out that the AI wasn't even looking at the animal. It was looking at the snow behind it in the background and being like, oh, well, there's snow, so it must be a wolf. And these were huskies instead.
Sure.
But what was interesting is, if we put it in a more real world scenario, maybe it's denying loans, like you mentioned, or choosing to fire weapons or something like that.
Right.
Not to turn this into a political discussion, but might it be too late by the time we realize there's a problem?
Well, that's why some people are arguing that it is already too late, in that we haven't had enough discussion about it. We haven't understood the thing of how do you test an AI. We have a lot of history with testing drugs, for instance.
Yeah.
We don't have really any history, except in some groups in academia, are starting to ask the questions of how do we test these things? Because the thing that you were talking about, the photographic recognition, is typically done with what's called a neural network, or a system that has a series of inputs. In many cases, it's all the pixels in the image. And then it has an output. And in the case of dog wolf, that's really a yes or no. It's either yes, a wolf, no, a dog. If you presented a human, it's saying, no, that's not a wolf. But of course, that's not what the original thing was designed to do. Those deep neural networks, unfortunately, are very difficult to debug. Why is it making the decision that it's making? Because if it's sufficiently complex, you can't tell the logic, because there is no logic, so to speak, anymore.
Yeah.
It was programmed via an enormous amount of data sets. It learned from the presented data that was classified, so-called classified data. If you give it 1,000 wolves and 1,000 dogs and you classify them, then from there, it supposedly can use that classified data to go ahead and do it on its own. But those of us that are working in machine learning know that that is just based on that small data set.
Yeah.
And therefore, you don't really know how it is making that decision.
Well, and even if you ask a person, like, okay, is this a wolf or a dog? Well, you're going to know. But if you say, well, how did you come to that conclusion? Well, because it's obvious. It's a dog. It's even hard for us to explain sometimes why we know what we know.
Right. And of course, if you have a wolf husky mix, and this one happens to have a lot of the wolf characteristics in it, you take a look at those two, and if you could be hard pressed to be able to tell, but both of them would look pretty scary if they were coming at you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No kidding. So, yeah. So we're kind of running up on our time limit here, but if there was just like two things advice or something you'd want to tell people about AI, something good, something that we can use it for that you think you would encourage people to use it for, and then maybe some cautions.
Yeah. Well, so I've been doing some research on AI and machine learning for being able to classify malware. So I can look on a network and I can look at data packets and executables or programs or scripts that are coming through the network. And with a pretty high reliability now, we can determine those that are malicious. And when I say malicious, they are touching files, they are touching portions of the computer, they are asking questions that I, as the user, would not want.
Yeah.
So that is a useful thing. And at the RSA conference, everyone was talking AI.
Yeah.
Because we don't have enough workers in cybersecurity, and we need to create more, and yet we can't train them fast enough.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to add machine learning and artificial intelligence to do many of the jobs that are quite repetitive. Machines are good at repetitive jobs.
Yeah. For anyone who's worked in a security operations center knows that just looking through these logs is not a fun job. So I think a lot of people will be glad to have AI take that over.
That's right. Now, some of the things that are concerns about AI is over-reliance and believing that because it has what looks like very interesting capabilities, that it's smart.
Right.
And that it can do something good, when in fact we don't even know why it's doing or what it's doing. So that's the big concern.
Yeah, and I've run into examples of it being good and bad myself using just ChatGPT. The other day we had to debug some code, and I was able to just paste it in there. It told me the problem. Great, awesome. But then on the other side, I was trying to write an article and have it help me, and I knew it pointed out many different things that it said were true that just weren't.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, yeah, we got to watch it. Be a little careful, not as you said, not be overly reliant on it.
Yeah. And we don't do enough critical thinking. We don't teach that. Go to criticalthinking.org because we should be teaching that in kindergarten and redoing it over and over. And that's something that I think could be a great discussion.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so tell us how can we get involved with Center for the Future? I know you brought that up. I think that's a great thing for the community. Helping bring money into the community as well, and
that's right.
Create jobs.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity, and we are doing a thing we call it the Startup Hackathon. And June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, we're going to be getting another cohort. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're thinking of doing a startup, if you want to get involved, then you can go to our website, centerfuture.org, and you can take a look. We have events on there. We have software development meetups. We have web dev meetups. We have co-working space. We have a variety of things going on there, as well as about 9 companies already involved. So we're getting more companies involved, and we are doing some additional funding. We have a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Rural Business Development Grant, because Prescott is still considered rural for a little bit longer.
A little bit more.
Yeah, because 50,000 is the limit. And so go to the website, come visit us. We're on 220 South Marina Street, which is right next to the police department.
Yep, right downtown.
Right across from the library downtown at our headquarters there. And we're oftentimes down there doing a variety of different things.
Perfect.
So
awesome.
It's great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, centerfuture.org.
Centerfuture.org.
Okay. And we'll post a link in the comments as well. And then if you want to keep up with tech news, I put out a newsletter every month as well. I'll put the link in the description if you want to sign up for that.
Great.
But yeah. Anyway, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been great. And this is, of course, I think just the beginning of the conversation about AI. I hope it continues all throughout the country.
And hopefully on a positive path.
That's what we're hoping.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, anyone out there joining us. And we'll catch you next time on Tech Talk with TechStop.